Hello and welcome. I'm Scott, and today I'm going to teach you how to make this leather lighter case. Link for the pattern in the description box below, and without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so in order to get started here, we're going to need a few things. First of all, we're going to need our pattern. We're going to need a piece of 5 to 6 ounce vegetable tanned leather. We're going to need some masking tape. We're going to need waxed thread. This is 0.8 millimeter waxed thread. We're going to need a couple of needles. We're going to need a round punch. This is a 1/16 inch round punch. You can use anything that's roughly equivalent in size. We're also going to need a mallet. We're going to need some plain old tap water, a rag or a sponge. Here I'm using a rag here. We're going to need a knife and a lighter. The first thing we're going to do once we print out our pattern is that we're going to take this test page here and we're just going to measure 2 by 2 and just make sure that it's the correct measurement before we get started. Okay, now we're going to cut out our pattern. You don't want to cut directly along the line just yet because we're going to be taping this down to our leather. Okay, now we're going to punch out our stitching holes. Now that we've punched out our stitching holes, while we're here at our punch table, now for these little inside curves, what I like to do is just take my round punch and just punch the corners out here. And that'll make it a lot easier when you go to cut this little middle section. It'll make it easier to cut that. Okay, now we're going to cut our leather piece out. Now, if you are like me and sometimes have trouble following the lines, I just use a ruler. Now, I almost always, when cutting leather, just use a plain old box cutter here. Now we're going to move on to the beveling portion of the project. Now, what I do with these, I don't bevel the entire thing because the edges here they're not going to be exposed. When it's sewn together, they're going to butt up together. So those are not ever going to be seen. So there's no really point in beveling those. However, I do bevel the top and the bottom here, and this I believe is a number 2 edge beveler. I got this from Tandy, and we're going to also bevel this little inside part here. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to be stamping the leather. Now, if you don't have access to leatherworking stamps, if you're a beginner, you don't have a lot of tools, or if you just don't feel like decorating your lighter case, you can skip over this part and go straight to the dyeing process. But I have a stamp here. It's a 3D eagle's head stamp, and I'm going to stamp the slider case with an eagle. So what I'm going to do is take my water, a little rag, and I'm just going to wet the leather. It doesn't have to soak all the way through. We're not going to be doing any heavy tooling on it. We just basically want to get it the surface a little bit wet here. And we're going to let that sit for about, I don't know, 5 minutes or so until the leather starts to turn. See how it's darkened? As soon as it starts to turn back to its original color, then you can start stamping on it. Okay, so I have let this sit for about, I don't know, 5 minutes or so. It's starting to turn back to its normal color, and I'm just gonna set that stamp in there, give it a couple of good whacks, and there we go. There's one side, and now I'm gonna do the other side. And there we go. Okay, moving on. Now we're gonna dye the leather. Now what I've got here, this is some EcoFlow. This is water-based dye. This is blue. Now the interesting thing about water-based dyes is that you can thin them just by adding some ordinary tap water. Sometimes they come straight out of the bottle. They're kind of dark, some of these colors. Sometimes you need to thin them out if if you're looking for a lighter shade. You can thin this up just by adding some plain old tap water. Normally, I like to dye my leather with an airbrush, but I realize some people can't afford an airbrush. So what I'm going to do for the purposes of this video is I'm going to use a good old-fashioned dauber to dye this leather with. Now all you got to do, you just a little dye in a little jar here and just do, I like to do circles, that way you get a nice even coat of you get a nice even coat of dye. Just go in circles. Now we're only going to dye the front part of this leather because it's not going to be seen once it has a lighter inside of it. Nobody's gonna see the inside, so there's really not much point of dyeing the inside of this. Maybe just the very edges of the inside there is what I like to do here. And there, just as simple as that. And you're definitely going to want to put down some paper, plastic, something to protect the surface of your work area, because leather dye will get all over everything, and you're definitely going to want to wear gloves like I am. Okay, now that our dye has dried completely, I've let this sit for, I don't know, probably 30 minutes or so. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use an antique to bring out all the little impressions of the stamp there. So first thing though, we're going to put a resist on it. This is a product called Super Sheen. This is a finish. It also acts as a resist. And as the name implies, a resist is meant to resist the antique. So I'm just going to put, use a dauber, and we're just going to put just a little light, just going to go lightly over the top of the stamp, and we're going to make sure we get the resist all over every part of the leather where we don't want antique. Okay, now that our resist has had time to dry, we're going to move on to the antique. Now, what I've got here is a medium brown antique paste. This is Fibings brand antique paste. And we're going to take a brush. Now you can use a dauber, you can use a paper towel, you can use your finger. In this project, I am going to use a cheapo paintbrush. I think I got this at the dollar store, or maybe the cheapo art section at Walmart. These come in great big packs. For like $5, you get, I don't know, like a dozen brushes or something like that. Is we're gonna let this sit for a minute, and then we're gonna take a paper towel and we're gonna wipe this all, wipe it all away, and see how well that just brings all the little impressions out and doesn't stay where we don't want it to. Okay, now that our antique has a little time to set, I've let this set for about 10 or 15 minutes. We're going to go back in with our super sheen, and we're just going to put a nice generous coat of super sheen all over the entire project. Now that our antique has had time to set, keep in mind also that pretty much any type of finish that you put on the leather will darken it a little bit, so keep that in mind. Okay, now that's had a little bit of time to dry here. We're gonna finish our edges. Now I'm using here, this is a die marker that I got a while ago, which I really like this thing, but you don't have to dye your edges. You can just leave them the color of I don't know, whatever dye you used on your project. I just happen to like a nice dyed edge, and I just think that it looks really nice, so that's why I'm doing it. You do not have to dye your edges. You don't have to use a die marker. There are all kinds of different methods that you can use to dye the edges of leather, so it's all up to you. What I have here is a product called Gum Tragacanth, or Gum Trag for short. And I'm just going to take, you can use all kinds of different methods, putting this on the edges. But for the purposes of this video, I am just going to use my finger, and I'm going to use this wood slicker. Now I have a Dremel, I have a power burnisher, and that's usually what I use whenever I go to slick my edges, but I realize that a lot of people can't afford those things, so I'm going to show you how to do it without machines. This is the good old-fashioned way of burnishing the edges of your leather. Okay, now on to the final step in our project. Once this is completely dry, we're gonna grab our wet rag here that we had from before, and we're just gonna wet this part of the leather here. Just let that soak in for just a second. And what that's going to do is going to make it soft and pliable, and that's going to prevent the leather from cracking and just, make it easier to fold in half for us. Then what we're going to do is we're going to take our 2 needles and our thread. Now, I have here, this is 0.8 millimeter waxed thread that I'm using. We're going to take our needles and we're going to thread the needle. So we're going to put the thread, if you've never done this, we're going to put the thread through the eye of the needle, and then we're going to pierce the thread with the tip of the needle, like that. And then we're going to pull this back all the way behind the needle, and then we're going to pull it tight. And that makes a nice little knot there, and that keeps the thread from coming off of our needle while we're working. And I'm going to do the same for the second one. Now that we've done that, we can start stitching. This is not going to be a tutorial on how to do a cross stitch. There are plenty of those on the internet. This is just going to give you a quick little demonstration for the purposes of completing this pattern. Alright, now we're going to go, first we're going to go across, through, and then down to the next hole, like so. And pull that snug. We're not going to pull it tight, we're just going to pull it snug. And then with the other needle, we're going to go through the other side, down to the next hole, and we're going to pull that snug, just like so. Make sure they're nice and even, and then we're just going to repeat. We're going to go through across the same hole and then down into the next one. Just like so, and repeat. And we're going to do that all the way down the length of the seam. Now, I've started on the bottom, and the reason for that is once you get to the end, we're going to do a couple of back stitches, and then we're going to snip the end of the threads. And it's going to be really difficult to do that if we're all the way at the bottom here, because that's going to be sealed up. That's going to be sewn closed there. Okay, now here we go. We made it to the last couple of stitches here, and I'm going to do a couple of back stitches, and then we're going to burn off the end of the thread. We're going to snip the end of the thread, and we're going to burn it off with the lighter. All right, there we go. Now, just tie a little knot here. And we're just going to snip those threads. And we're just burning off the ends with the lighter. Here we go. And there we go. And now your lighter case is complete.